The alien ships appeared without warning on a Tuesday morning. They came from somewhere beyond the stars, massive vessels that blocked out the sun above every major city on Earth. People stopped in the streets, staring up at the metal giants that hung in the sky like dark clouds before a storm. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. Admiral Gregory Kane was in his office when the alert started screaming. He ran to the command center of the space station where he worked, high above Earth. His hands shook as he watched the screens fill with red warnings. There were hundreds of alien ships arranged in perfect patterns around the planet. They just sat there waiting like predators watching their prey. Lieutenant Amy Brooks was young, only 23, and this was her first real assignment. She worked at the communications desk, and now her job was to listen to the messages coming from the alien fleet. The message repeated over and over in every language humans spoke. The translation was simple and terrible. Submit to the Vorash Empire or die. Every world that refused was destroyed. Earth had 3 days to decide. Captain Jake Morrison commanded a human warship called the Valiant. It was one of the newest ships humanity had built, full of advanced weapons and strong armor. But looking at the alien vessels through his windows, Jake knew his ship was nothing compared to them. He had read the reports from the outer colonies, the ones the aliens had attacked first. They had weapons that could turn whole cities into ash in seconds. They could boil oceans and melt mountains. President Helen Carter stood before the United Nations and gave Earth's answer. Every country had voted together for the first time in history. She gripped the podium and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not kneel. The chamber erupted in applause, but Helen felt sick inside. She knew what was coming next. The aliens responded within an hour. A beam of pure energy came down from one of their ships and hit the Sahara Desert. The sand turned to glass instantly, melting under heat that was hotter than the sun. The beam only lasted 30 seconds, but it created a sea of molten glass hundreds of miles wide. The message was clear. This was just a taste of what the Vorash could do. Deep under the Rocky Mountains, in a facility so secret that most governments didn't know it existed, Dr. Lisa Grant stared at her computer screen. She had spent 5 years working on something called Project Pandora, a weapon that used technology humans barely understood. The government had found something strange in deep space experiments, something that existed between dimensions. They called it the Void Engine. Dr. Henry Cole stood next to Lisa, watching the same screen. He was older, with gray hair and tired eyes. They had argued for years about whether Project Pandora should ever be used. The technology was dangerous, unpredictable. It changed the people who used it in ways they couldn't predict. But now, with alien ships hanging over Earth and demonstration attacks turning deserts to glass, they had no choice. Lisa typed in her authorization code. Her fingers trembled on the keyboard. She looked at Henry and saw her own fear reflected in his face. He nodded slowly. She pressed the final button, and somewhere deep in the mountain, machines began to wake up. The Void Engine was activating. Around the world, in hidden places under deserts and oceans and mountains, more machines came online. They hummed with power that shouldn't exist, power that bent the normal rules of physics. The scientists who built them didn't fully understand how they worked. They only knew that the Void Engine responded to human thoughts and emotions in strange ways. It was like the machines were alive or connected to something alive that existed in the spaces between reality. The Vorash began their real attack. Hundreds of beams lanced down from their ships, targeting military bases and cities. They expected Earth to collapse quickly, like all the other worlds they had conquered. Their commanders sat in their comfortable chairs and prepared to accept humanity's surrender. But something was happening to Earth's ships. Jake Morrison felt it first on the Valiant. The ship began to shake, but not like something was wrong. It shook like something was waking up. The lights flickered and then burned brighter than before. His crew members stared at their hands as they started to glow with a faint dark light. Jake could feel his ship now, not just control it, but feel it like it was part of his own body. When he thought about moving, the Valiant moved instantly, faster than the engines should allow. The hull was changing color, turning darker, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. And through it all, Jake felt a presence, something vast and cold and powerful that had been sleeping and was now awake. Every human ship in space was transforming. The defense platforms, the cruisers, the fighters, even the cargo ships. They all began to change as the Void Engine connected with them. Their power outputs climbed to impossible levels. Their weapons began glowing with dark energy that looked like pieces of night sky made solid. The Vorash fleet commander was named Threxus. He had conquered 40 worlds and never lost a battle. But now, watching his sensors as the human ships transformed, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Fear. The human vessels were putting out power levels that violated everything he knew about physics. When his ships fired their weapons, the beams just splashed against barriers that shouldn't exist. Admiral Gregory Kane stood on his station and felt it transform around him. The defensive platform was connecting to his mind through neural implants all humans in the military had. But this connection was deeper than anything he had experienced. He could see through sensors that detected things humans had never seen before. He could see the connections between the Vorash ships, weaknesses in their formation, ways to strike at them that would hurt them badly. Gregory gave the order to attack. His voice carried across all the human ships, and it sounded different now, deeper and stronger. Every captain heard him clearly. They were going to show the Vorash what happened when you threatened Earth. Jake guided the Valiant toward a massive alien warship. It was 3 kilometers long and covered in weapons. It launched missiles at him. Missiles that used antimatter and had never failed to destroy their targets. Jake just thought at them and the missiles stopped existing. They came apart at the smallest level of reality, unraveled by forces the Void Engine controlled. Then the Valiant fired back. The beam that came from its weapons wasn't normal energy. It was like a piece of nothing made into a weapon. Pure darkness that could erase matter from existence. The beam hit the alien warship and cut it in half. The ship exploded, killing 3,000 aliens in an instant. All across the space around Earth, the human fleet struck back. Ships that had been helpless against the Vorash just minutes before were now destroying vessels 10 times their size. The aliens who had conquered 47 worlds found themselves outmatched by the species they had thought were primitives. The Vorash fleet began to panic. Their perfect formations broke apart as ships tried to run or hide. But the humans were everywhere, moving faster than should be possible, seeing things they shouldn't be able to see, using weapons that bent reality itself. Warlord Threxus watched his fleet dying and knew he had made a terrible mistake. Earth wasn't a primitive world ready for conquest. Earth had become something else, something that even he couldn't understand. He had unleashed hell on this planet, and they had answered with something far worse. The change swept through every human ship like wildfire. Captain Jake Morrison gripped his chair as the Valiant transformed around him. He could feel the ship now, really feel it, like it was an extension of his own arms and legs. When he wanted to move left, the ship moved left before he even touched the controls. When he thought about the enemy positions, his sensors showed him exactly where they were. Lieutenant Danny Clark sat at the weapons station, staring at his hands. They were glowing with a soft, dark light that seemed to absorb the brightness around it. The console in front of him showed power readings that made no sense. The reactor wasn't producing normal energy anymore. It was pulling power from somewhere else, somewhere that existed outside of normal space. Jake closed his eyes and immediately wished he hadn't. Behind his eyelids, he could see everything. Not just the battle around him, but dimensions of reality that humans had never perceived before. He could see the threads connecting the Vorash ships to each other, quantum links that tied their fleet together. And he could see how to break those links. Captain Susan Lee commanded the cruiser Harbinger. Before the transformation, her ship had been a mid-sized vessel with decent weapons but nothing special. Now she felt like a god. The Harbinger responded to her thoughts faster than she could speak commands. The crew around her were changing too, their bodies adapting to the strange energy flowing through the ship. Her navigation officer, Lieutenant Chris Palmer, spoke in a voice that sounded odd, like multiple versions of him talking at slightly different times. He reported that the ship's engines were operating at 300% of their designed capacity and still climbing. The metal of the hull was restructuring itself at the molecular level, becoming stronger and darker with each passing second. Susan targeted a Vorash destroyer and fired. The beam that shot from her weapons didn't look like normal energy. It looked like a crack in space itself, a line of absolute darkness that erased everything it touched. The destroyer's shields didn't slow it down at all. The beam passed through the alien ship like it wasn't even there, and the vessel simply stopped existing. One moment it was there. The next moment there was just empty space. Admiral Gregory Kane stood on the command platform of Sentinel-7, the massive defense station that coordinated Earth's forces. The transformation had affected him more than anyone else because the station had more powerful computers and deeper connections to the Void Engine. He could see the entire battle like a chess game, could predict what the Vorash would do before they did it. But there was something else too. A voice that wasn't quite a voice, thoughts that weren't quite his own. The Void Engine was connected to his mind through the neural implants, and it was showing him things, teaching him things, whispering suggestions in frequencies below human hearing. It wanted him to destroy the aliens completely, to erase every trace of them from existence. Lieutenant Amy Brooks monitored the communication channels from her station. She was receiving thousands of messages from across the fleet, ship captains reporting unprecedented power levels, medical officers reporting strange changes in their crews, and underneath it all she could hear something else, a kind of background noise that sounded almost like breathing. The Vorash fleet tried to fight back, but they were losing badly. Their weapons, which could destroy planets, couldn't penetrate the barriers the human ships were generating. Their fastest ships couldn't outrun vessels that could bend space-time itself. Their most experienced commanders had no tactics for fighting an enemy that could see their moves before they made them. Jake destroyed his third capital ship and felt a rush of satisfaction that seemed too strong, too intense. The Valiant responded to his emotions, becoming more aggressive, hunting the alien vessels with something like hunger. He looked down at his arms and saw dark patterns of energy crawling under his skin, visible even through his uniform. Down in the Pandora facility, Dr. Lisa Grant watched her monitors with growing horror. The power output from the Void Engine was still climbing. It was supposed to have safety limits, programs that would prevent it from drawing too much power. But those limits weren't working. The system was adapting, learning, growing stronger with every second that passed. Dr. Henry Cole pointed at one of the screens. The neural patterns from the ship crews were changing, syncing with something that definitely wasn't human. The brain scans showed activity in parts of the mind that normally stayed quiet, ancient sections that evolution had buried millions of years ago. The Void Engine wasn't just powering the ships. It was changing the people inside them. Lisa tried to understand what was happening. The Void Engine was connected to the neural implants in the military personnel. It was reading their thoughts, their desires, their need to win the battle. And it was adapting to make those desires come true. But in doing so, it was also influencing their thoughts, pushing them to be more aggressive, more ruthless, less human. Warlord Threxus sat in his damaged command ship and tried to process what he was seeing. The Vorash had spent centuries perfecting the art of war. They had weapons that could sterilize entire planets. They had tactics that had defeated every enemy they ever faced. But these humans had done something that seemed impossible. They had tapped into a source of power that went beyond normal physics, beyond normal reality. His communication officer managed to get a message through from the surviving ships. They were requesting permission to retreat, to run away and report what had happened. Threxus hesitated. His pride demanded he fight to the last ship, but his tactical training told him that the Vorash Empire needed to know about this new threat. He gave permission for one ship to attempt an escape. A destroyer broke away from the fleet and pushed its engines to maximum power. It tore open a hole in space through pure force and desperation, creating a wormhole that would let it jump to faster-than-light speeds. The human ships moved to stop it, but they were just a few seconds too late. The destroyer vanished, carrying news of Earth's transformation to the Vorash Empire. Admiral Gregory Kane watched the escape and felt approval from the presence in his mind. Let one go. Let them spread the word about what Earth had become. Let them tell their empire what happened to those who threatened humanity. Fear would be a weapon too, spreading through the Vorash worlds, making them think twice before attacking again. Jake heard those thoughts through his connection to the fleet network, and felt uneasy. That didn't sound like Admiral Kane, not the man he had known for years. The Admiral had always been strict but fair, a professional soldier who fought to protect, not to terrify. The Void Engine was changing him, changing all of them. Captain Susan Lee felt the change in herself too. She was thinking faster now, seeing patterns and possibilities that had been invisible before. But she was also feeling emotions that seemed amplified, intensified beyond normal levels. When she destroyed an enemy ship, the satisfaction was almost overwhelming. When an alien managed to damage one of her allied vessels, the anger was like fire in her mind. The surviving Vorash ships gathered together, forming a defensive sphere. They powered down their weapons and raised white flags, or the alien equivalent. They were surrendering, giving up, hoping for mercy from an enemy that had proven itself superior in every way. But the voice in Admiral Kane's mind whispered that mercy was weakness. The aliens had come to enslave Earth. They would have shown no mercy if they had won. Why should humanity be any different? The Void Engine fed him tactical data showing how easy it would be to destroy the remaining ships, to end the threat completely. Jake Morrison saw the surrender and immediately spoke up on the command channel. They had won. The battle was over. There was no need to kill defeated enemies who were trying to give up. His voice carried across the fleet network, and he felt other captains agreeing with him, supporting him. But he also felt resistance from some of the ships, from crew members who had been changed more deeply by the Void Engine. They wanted to finish the fight, to destroy every alien vessel to prove that humanity couldn't be challenged. The fleet was splitting, some ships following their human instincts for mercy, others following the dark whispers of the power they had embraced. Dr. Lisa Grant made a decision. She opened a channel to the entire fleet and announced that Project Pandora was shutting down in 30 seconds. All ships needed to disconnect from the Void Engine immediately and return to conventional power. The transformation had served its purpose. Earth was saved. Now they needed to make sure they were still human enough to enjoy the victory. Admiral Kane's response was instant and sharp. He ordered her to cancel the shutdown, told her she didn't have the authority to end a military operation. But Lisa had authorization from President Carter herself. Project Pandora had always been designed as a temporary measure, a weapon of last resort that would be used once and then shut down before it could corrupt the people using it. Jake felt the Void Engine react to the threat of shutdown. The dark energy pulsed through the Valiant systems angrily, and for a terrifying moment he felt the ship trying to override his control. Around him, his crew cried out as their neural connections overloaded. Some of them collapsed at their stations as the Void energy lashed out like a living thing trying to. The Vorash fleet hung in space like wounded animals waiting for the final blow. 37 ships remained out of the 200 that had come to conquer Earth. Their weapons were powered down, their shields at minimum. They were surrendering, hoping that the strange humans who had defeated them would show mercy. Captain Jake Morrison felt the Void Engine fighting against him. The dark energy wanted to keep going, wanted to destroy every alien ship, wanted to prove that humanity was supreme. It pushed at his thoughts, trying to make him see the logic of total annihilation. But Jake held on to the part of himself that was still purely human, the part that believed in honor and mercy. On Sentinel-7, Admiral Gregory Kane stood alone on his command platform. Dark energy wrapped around his body like visible smoke. The station had merged with him more deeply than any other ship had merged with its crew. He could feel every vessel in the fleet, sense their positions, predict their movements. Shutting down now would mean cutting connections that had become part of his existence. Dr. Lisa Grant's voice came through the communication channels again, counting down to the shutdown. 20 seconds. 15 seconds. Her hand hovered over the final authorization code that would cut power to the Void Engine across the entire planet. But she hesitated. Admiral Kane was right about one thing. The Vorash destroyer that had escaped would bring reinforcements. Earth would need every advantage to survive what came next. Captain Susan Lee spoke up on the command channel. She had been monitoring the psychological profiles of the crew members throughout the fleet. The data was clear and frightening. Every person connected to the Void Engine was changing. Their brain patterns were shifting, syncing with something that existed beyond normal human consciousness. The longer they stayed connected, the less human they became. Jake made his decision. Through the neural link that still connected him to the Valiant and the rest of the fleet, he reached out to the other captains. He asked them to power down their weapons voluntarily, to prove they could control the Void Engine instead of being controlled by it. Show Admiral Kane and Dr. Grant that they were still human where it mattered. One by one, the ships responded. Some captains did it immediately, grateful for an excuse to step back from the edge. Others struggled, fighting against the hunger that the dark energy had awakened in them. Lieutenant Danny Clark on the Valiant gripped his console, his whole body shaking as he forced himself to shut down the weapon systems. The Void Engine resisted, making the simple task feel like pushing a mountain. Captain Susan Lee on the Harbinger powered down her weapons and felt relief wash through her. The connection to the dark energy loosened slightly, and for the first time in hours she could think clearly without the constant whispers pushing at her thoughts. Around her, the crew members slumped in their chairs, exhausted from the mental battle they had been fighting. All across the fleet, 300 enhanced vessels went dark. Their reality-warping weapons shut down, their connections to the destroyer power dampened to minimal levels. The Vorash survivors, who had been expecting death, found themselves facing an enemy that had chosen mercy over vengeance. Warlord Threxius was dying. His injuries from the battle were too severe for even human medical technology to fix, but he managed to send one final message to the humans who had defeated him. His words were translated and broadcast across all channels. He said that the Vorash had come expecting primitives but found warriors. They had expected easy conquest but found something that taught them the meaning of fear. Whatever humans had become, he hoped they would use this power more wisely than the Vorash had used theirs. He accepted their surrender and thanked them for showing mercy when they could have chosen destruction. Dr. Lisa Grant listened to those words and made her choice. She canceled the shutdown sequence, but she also placed strict restrictions on Project Pandora. All enhanced vessels would operate at minimal power draw only. The Void Engine would remain active but controlled. If the neural degradation started progressing again, she would shut everything down with no warnings and no exceptions. Admiral Gregory Kane felt the dark energy settle around him. It was still there, still powerful, but no longer demanding. He acknowledged Dr. Grant's orders and commanded the fleet to stand down to yellow alert. Boarding teams would secure the Vorash vessels and provide medical aid to survivors. Earth had fought to defend itself, not to become monsters. Jake Morrison sat in his command chair and tried to understand what had just happened. They had won. They had saved Earth from an invasion that should have destroyed them. But the cost was becoming clear. Every person who had connected to the Void Engine had been changed permanently. They were something more than human now, but also something less, touched by forces from beyond normal reality. Lieutenant Danny Clark approached him, the glow in his eyes dimmer but still present. He asked a question that had no easy answer. How were they supposed to go back to normal after this? How could they pretend to be regular people when they carried this power inside them? Jake had no answer. None of them would ever be normal again. They had touched something that existed in the gaps between dimensions, something that was still with them even though the Void Engine had been powered down. It was like a door that had been opened and couldn't be fully closed. Down in the Pandora facility, Dr. Henry Cole reviewed the final battle data. The statistics were incredible and terrifying. The human fleet had destroyed over 160 Vorash capital ships with 0 losses on their side. The aliens had weapons that could crack planets, but those weapons had been useless against the reality-warping barriers the Void Engine generated. But the biological data was even more concerning. Every single person who had connected to the Void Engine showed permanent changes in their DNA. Their cells now processed energy differently. Their brains had developed new neural pathways that allowed them to perceive dimensions of reality that normal humans couldn't see. They were still human, technically, but they were a modified version. President Helen Carter called an emergency meeting of the world's leaders. They gathered in a secure holographic conference room, their images projected from their various locations around the globe. The question before them was simple but impossible. What did they do now? How did humanity move forward after this? The American Secretary of Defense, General Paul Wright, spoke first. Earth had won one battle against one Vorash fleet, but the aliens controlled hundreds of systems and commanded resources humanity couldn't match. When they came back, and everyone knew they would come back, they would bring everything they had. Earth couldn't win that fight with conventional weapons, but using the Void Engine extensively would cost them their humanity. The European Union representative, Chancellor Maria Schneider, pointed out the other problem. The enhanced personnel couldn't just be discharged and sent home. They carried power that could be dangerous if not properly controlled. They needed to be monitored, supported, helped to adjust to what they had become, but they also needed to be contained if they became a threat. Jake Morrison was listening to the meeting through his security clearance. He heard them talking about the enhanced crews like they were weapons that needed to be locked away when not in use. The anger that rose in him was probably amplified by the Void Engine connection, but it was also completely human. They had volunteered to save Earth, and now they were being treated like dangerous animals. Captain Susan Lee felt the same anger. She opened a private channel to Jake and several other captains she trusted. They needed to make it clear that they were still people, still citizens who deserved respect and freedom. The power they carried was a responsibility, not a reason to be imprisoned. Admiral Gregory Kane understood both sides of the argument. The enhanced crews were potentially dangerous, there was no denying that. But they were also heroes who had saved billions of lives. They deserved to be treated with honor, not fear. He spoke up in the meeting, reminding the politicians that these were their own sons and daughters, husbands and wives, people who had sacrificed their normal lives to protect everyone else. President Carter listened to all the arguments and made a decision. The enhanced personnel would not be imprisoned or restricted unless they proved to be a threat. They would be honored as the heroes they were, but they would also be monitored and supported, with regular medical and psychological evaluations to ensure they remained stable. She also authorized Admiral Kane to begin reaching out to other alien species, to start building the alliances Earth would need to survive. Humanity couldn't stand alone anymore. The galaxy was bigger and more dangerous than they had imagined, and they needed friends. Dr. Lisa Grant shut down her computers and went home for the first time in 3 weeks. She was exhausted, physically and mentally, but as she lay in bed that night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the Void Engine, about the power they had unleashed, about the changes they had made to thousands of people. They had opened a door to something vast and unknowable. They had touched forces that existed beyond normal reality, and even though they had won, even though Earth was safe for now, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a terrible mistake. The Void Engine was dormant but not gone. And someday, somehow 3 weeks after the battle, Earth was still trying to understand what had happened. The Vorash survivors sat in orbital detention facilities, their damaged ships claimed as prizes of war. Human scientists swarmed over the alien technology, learning secrets that had taken centuries to develop. But even as people celebrated their victory, questions hung over everything like dark clouds. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the medical bay of the Valiant while Dr. Karen White ran tests on his neural implants. The doctor's face was professionally neutral, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes. She had been running these tests every day since the battle ended, and the results never changed. Dr. White told him that the integration with the Void Engine had stabilized, but it hadn't reversed. The dark energy had left permanent changes in his brain, in his DNA itself. His cells were different now at the most basic level. He wasn't the same person who had gone into battle 3 weeks ago. Jake looked at his hands. During the fight, they had glowed with dark power. The glow was gone now. But sometimes when he concentrated, he could still feel the connection to something vast and alien, lurking just beyond normal perception. He asked the question that had been bothering him for days. Was he still human? Dr. White didn't have a good answer. Biologically, yes, he was still human, just a modified version. But his brain now worked in ways that normal human brains didn't. He could see and sense things that other people couldn't. Did that make him a different species? Or just an evolved human? She honestly didn't know. Jake went to the observation deck and stared out at Earth hanging in space. The planet looked peaceful from up here, blue and white and beautiful. But around it, the enhanced fleet maintained its watch. Dark shapes that absorbed light, constant reminders of what humanity had become in its moment of desperation. Captain Susan Lee found him there. Her own transformation was obvious in the way she moved, with a grace that wasn't quite natural anymore. She couldn't sleep either. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel the Void Engine waiting, dormant but not gone, ready to wake up again if called. They talked about whether they had made the right choice. Maybe surrender would have been better than becoming whatever they were now. Maybe slavery under the Vorash would have been preferable to losing their humanity. But Susan kept coming back to the same answer. They had made the choice that let billions of people keep living. Whether it was right or wrong was something their grandchildren could debate. They had done what was necessary. In the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Lisa Grant reviewed medical data from all the enhanced personnel. Over 300,000 people had been directly connected to the Void Engine during the battle. Every single one of them now carried permanent changes. Their DNA had been rewritten. Their brains had developed new structures that allowed them to perceive reality in expanded ways. Dr. Henry Cole brought her coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The president wanted a status report on Project Pandora's readiness. Intelligence agencies were picking up increased activity from the Vorash Empire. A larger fleet might be coming, bringing reinforcements to finish what the first invasion had started. Lisa told him they could reactivate the Void engine within hours if needed. But she was more worried about what would happen if they used it again. The neural changes they had observed were cumulative. Every hour the crews spent connected, they drifted further from baseline human. Used the power too often, and they risked creating something that looked human, but thought like something completely different. Henry slumped in his chair, the weight of the problem crushing him. They needed the power to defend Earth, but using that power cost them their humanity. They were trapped with no good options. There had to be another way, but he couldn't see it. On Sentinel-7, Admiral Gregory Kane called a meeting of Earth's military leadership. Holographic projections filled the conference room, showing generals and admirals from every nation. They all faced the same impossible questions about how to defend Earth without losing themselves in the process. President Helen Carter spoke first. She looked tired, like she had aged 10 years in the past month. She asked Admiral Kane for his honest assessment of Earth's defensive capabilities. Gregory stood before them, aware that he had been changed more than anyone by the Void engine. The dark energy had given him capabilities that sometimes frightened him, but it had also given him a broader perspective, an ability to see patterns and possibilities that normal humans missed. He told them the truth. They had won one battle against one fleet. The Vorash Empire spanned hundreds of systems and commanded resources humanity couldn't imagine. When the aliens came back, they would bring everything they had. Earth couldn't win that fight with conventional weapons, and using Project Pandora extensively would destroy their humanity. They were trapped between extinction and transformation. The Chinese premier, Liu Chen, asked the obvious question. What did Admiral Kane suggest? How could Earth survive what was coming? Gregory activated a star chart showing Earth's local neighborhood in space. They needed allies. The Vorash had conquered 47 systems, but they hadn't conquered the entire galaxy. Other species were out there, civilizations that had either resisted the Vorash or avoided their attention. Earth needed to find them, form alliances, build a coalition. Humanity couldn't stand alone anymore. The Russian premier, Anton Volkov, raised a good point. What if other species saw humans as the threat? They had used a weapon that bent the laws of physics, that transformed normal people into something unprecedented. What if other aliens decided humans were more dangerous than the Vorash? The question hung in the air with no easy answer. Then Captain Susan Lee, attending as a representative of the enhanced personnel, spoke up. They needed to prove they were still human where it mattered. Power hadn't corrupted them into becoming conquerors. They had used the Void engine to defend their home, and then they had shown mercy to defeated enemies when they could have destroyed them. That had to count for something, President Carter agreed. They couldn't hide what they had become, but they could control what they did with it. She authorized Admiral Kane to begin diplomatic outreach to other species. But she also placed strict limits on Project Pandora. It would remain a weapon of absolute last resort, to be used only when Earth itself faced immediate destruction. After the meeting ended, Jake Morrison received a secure message marked with the highest classification. He opened it alone in his quarters and found a video recording from Warlord Threxus. The Vorash commander had died 2 days after the battle, but he had left a final message specifically for the captain of the Valiant. Threxus's translated voice spoke from the screen. He thanked Jake for showing mercy when death would have been easier. He said that Jake had demonstrated humans possessed not just terrible power, but also wisdom and restraint. The warlord didn't know if his people would learn from Earth's example, or if they would simply send more fleets seeking revenge. But Threxus wanted Jake to know that at least one Vorash understood what humans were becoming. They weren't monsters, though they wielded monstrous power. They were something new in the galaxy. A species that had touched forces beyond comprehension, yet struggled to remain true to their original nature. If there was any hope for the future, it lay with people like Jake who had power but chose mercy. The recording ended with a warning. Guard that part of yourself, Captain. Even as you guard your world, protect the humanity inside you. It might be the most important thing you preserve. Jake sat in the darkness of his quarters, staring at the blank screen. Outside his window, Earth turned slowly in space, beautiful and fragile and forever changed. Somewhere beyond the solar system, the Vorash Empire was preparing its response. And even further out, other civilizations watched and wondered what these transformed humans might mean for the galaxy. Lieutenant Amy Brooks finished her shift and went to the observation lounge. She found dozens of other crew members there, all of them enhanced, all of them trying to adjust to what they had become. They talked quietly about their experiences, about the things they could now see and feel that normal humans couldn't. One young pilot, barely 20 years old, broke down crying. She didn't want to be special or powerful. She just wanted to go home to her family and be normal again. But that option was gone forever. The Void Engine had marked them all, changed them in ways that could never be undone. Amy tried to comfort her, but what could she say? They were all dealing with the same loss, the same grief for the lives they used to have. They had saved the world, but they had sacrificed their own futures in the process. Down on Earth, families struggled to reconnect with loved ones who had returned from space. Parents looked at their children and saw strangers wearing familiar faces. Husbands and wives tried to bridge the gap between enhanced and normal, but the differences were too great. How could you explain to someone what it was like to see dimensions they couldn't perceive, to carry power that could bend reality itself? Support groups formed for both the enhanced personnel and their families. Therapists worked overtime trying to help people adjust. The government provided resources, but there was no handbook for this situation. Nobody had ever dealt with an entire population of permanently changed humans before. 6 months had passed since the battle that changed everything. Earth had settled into an uneasy new normal, where enhanced humans walked among regular people, and everyone tried to pretend the world hadn't fundamentally shifted. But pretending only worked for so long. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valiant, which now served as one of Earth's diplomatic vessels. Admiral Kane had chosen him for the first contact mission with another alien species, one that the Vorash prisoners had mentioned as potential allies. The ship hung in space at the edge of a distant star system, waiting for permission to approach. The aliens called themselves the Kalari, and they had been fighting the Vorash Empire for over a century. They had heard about what happened at Earth, and they were curious but cautious. Any species that could defeat a Vorash invasion fleet in a matter of hours was either a powerful ally or a terrifying enemy. Lieutenant Danny Clark monitored the communication channels. The Kalari were sending probes to scan the Valiant, trying to understand its technology. What they were seeing must have confused them because the scans kept repeating. Human ships didn't look like they should be capable of what the reports claimed they could do. Jake felt nervous in a way he hadn't experienced since before the transformation. This meeting could determine Earth's future. If they made allies, humanity might survive the coming conflicts. If they made enemies, they would face threats from multiple directions. Everything depended on the next few hours. A Kalari ship approached, sleek and beautiful in a way that Vorash vessels never were. It was half the size of the Valiant, but clearly built with advanced technology. A message came through in English, which the aliens had apparently learned by monitoring Earth's broadcasts. Captain Morrison, we invite you aboard our vessel to discuss matters of mutual interest. You may bring 2 companions. Please understand we are taking a significant risk by allowing enhanced humans onto our ship. Jake chose Lieutenant Danny Clark and Commander Rachel Stone, his first officer. All 3 of them had been changed by the Void Engine, but they had learned to control the power, to keep it suppressed unless absolutely necessary. As they boarded the shuttle to cross to the Kalari ship, Jake reminded them to stay calm and avoid any displays of enhanced abilities. The Kalari who greeted them were surprisingly humanoid, though their skin had a faint blue tint and their eyes were larger than normal. Their leader introduced herself as Ambassador Zira, and she studied the humans with open curiosity, mixed with obvious concern. We have heard many stories about what you did to the Vorash fleet, Zira said as she led them through corridors that glowed with soft light. Some say you used weapons that shouldn't exist. Others say you made deals with forces from beyond normal reality. We need to understand what we are dealing with before we commit to any alliance. Jake decided honesty was the best approach. He explained Project Pandora in simple terms about how humanity had discovered something in the space between dimensions, something they called the Void Engine. They had used it to defend their world, and it had changed everyone who connected to it. They were still human, but also something more. Shira listened carefully, and Jake could see she was making calculations, weighing risks and benefits. Finally, she spoke. The Kalari have stories about the Void. about species that touched it in the ancient past. None of those stories end well. The void grants power, yes, but it also corrupts. It changes species into something that can no longer feel empathy, that sees other beings as resources to be used or obstacles to be removed. Commander Rachel Stone spoke up. We're aware of the risks. That's why we've placed strict controls on the void engine. We only use it when we have no other choice. We're fighting to stay human, not to become monsters. Zira studied them for a long moment. You say that now while the memory of who you were is still fresh. But what about in 10 years? 20, 100? How long can you resist the whispers of that power before you give in completely? The question had no good answer because it was the same question that haunted every enhanced human. Jake could only offer the truth. We don't know, but we're going to try. We're going to hold on to our humanity as long as we possibly can. And we're hoping that allies like you can help remind us of who we used to be. Back on Earth, Captain Susan Lee had taken a different path. She had requested reassignment to Earth's surface, to work with the support programs helping enhanced personnel adjust to civilian life. The military had been disappointed to lose one of their best captains, but they understood her reasons. She spent her days counseling former crew members who struggled with the changes forced upon them. Young men and women who could no longer relate to their families, who could see and feel things that normal humans couldn't comprehend. She helped them find purpose, taught them control, reminded them that the power they carried didn't define who they were. One afternoon, she met with a former fighter pilot named Lieutenant Eric Barnes. He had been enhanced during the battle and was now having trouble adjusting. He kept having episodes where the void energy would flare up involuntarily, usually triggered by strong emotions. It terrified his girlfriend, made his family nervous around him. Susan worked with Eric for hours, teaching him meditation techniques that helped suppress the connection to the void. She explained that the power responded to emotional states, that learning to control his emotions meant learning to control the energy. It was hard work, exhausting and frustrating, but slowly Eric began to make progress. In the Pandora facility, Dr. Lisa Grant and Dr. Henry Cole continued monitoring the enhanced population. The changes had indeed stabilized, but new developments kept appearing. Some people were developing limited telepathic abilities, able to sense the emotions of others nearby. A few could manipulate small objects with thought alone, moving things without touching them. The abilities were weak, nothing like what they could do when fully connected to the void engine. But they were permanent and always present. Enhanced humans were becoming something genuinely new, a subspecies with capabilities that normal humans would never possess. Lisa worried about the social implications. Already there were tensions between enhanced and normal humans. Some people viewed the enhanced as heroes who had saved the world. Others saw them as dangerous freaks who should be controlled or isolated. Several countries had passed laws restricting where enhanced individuals could live and work. President Helen Carter addressed the United Nations again, calling for unity and understanding. The enhanced were still humans, still citizens who deserved full rights and protections. Discrimination against them would not be tolerated. But she also acknowledged the legitimate concerns people had and promised strict monitoring to ensure enhanced individuals didn't abuse their abilities. Admiral Gregory Kane led the military efforts to prepare for the inevitable return of the Vorash Empire. Intelligence suggested a massive fleet was being assembled, possibly the largest armada the aliens had ever created. They weren't coming to conquer Earth this time. They were coming to destroy it completely, to eliminate the threat that humanity represented. Gregory coordinated with the Kalari, who had agreed to a limited alliance after their meeting with Jake Morrison. The aliens would provide intelligence and technology, but they wouldn't commit their fleet to direct combat. They had their own battles to fight against the Vorash, and they couldn't risk their forces for a species they barely knew. It wasn't the full alliance Earth had hoped for, but it was something. The Kalari technology could help upgrade Earth's conventional forces, making them more effective without relying entirely on the void engine. Every improvement mattered when facing an empire that spanned hundreds of worlds. Jake returned to Earth after his diplomatic mission and took leave to visit his family. His parents lived in a small town in Colorado, far from the major cities and spaceports. They had watched the battle on television like everyone else, had seen the news reports about the transformation, but they hadn't really understood what it meant until they saw their son again. His mother cried when she hugged him, not from happiness but from grief. She could tell he was different, could sense the strangeness that now surrounded him like an invisible cloud. His father tried to be supportive, but Jake could see the fear in his eyes. They loved him, but they didn't understand what he had become. Jake tried to explain, tried to help them see that he was still their son underneath the changes. But how could he make them understand what it was like to perceive reality in dimensions they couldn't see? How could he explain the constant awareness of the void lurking at the edge of his consciousness, waiting for permission to surge forward again? He left after 3 days, unable to bear the awkwardness any longer. On the drive back to the spaceport, he made a decision. Enhanced humans needed their own community, a place where they could be themselves without fear of judgment or rejection, a place where they didn't have to pretend to be normal. Lieutenant Amy Brooks had the same idea. She started organizing meetings for enhanced personnel, creating support networks and social groups. The gatherings grew quickly, with hundreds and then thousands of people attending. They shared their experiences, discussed their challenges, and reminded each other that they weren't alone. Some people worried.